All right, thank you, Abigail. And here with us now, Kirk Leopold, a retired U.S. Navy commander of the USS Cole and author of Front Burner, Al-Qaeda's attack on the USS Cole. Commander, welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. So we heard the president speak today. 20 years in Afghanistan, now all over. Commander, just your thoughts tonight. How are you feeling?
Well, obviously very mixed emotions. Like a lot of veterans today, I look at what has happened and occurred over the last 2 weeks as this debacle of a withdrawal has occurred. I think that while most Americans don't want a forever war, what the Americans weren't given was actually an understanding of why we were invested there. When you look at why we went in after the attacks on my ship in 2000, the 9/11 attacks certainly drove it in 2001. We need to be invested in that part of the world. It sits geographically in what's called the arc of instability between China, Pakistan, and Iran. And there is no substitute for having those eyes on the ground that really give you that ability to understand what is happening in a society, in a military, and throughout the country. So how we withdrew was an absolute disgrace for our nation.
Government officials say we still have both air and land options to facilitate a passage out. They seem to think they have a lot of leverage, but, the mantra for the United States military has always been to leave no one behind, and the withdrawal left many American citizens stranded in Afghanistan. President Biden, in his speech, says they'll still try to get them out. What happens to these people, Commander?
Well, I'm very concerned when the president says, I'll try to get you out. That certainly is a shift from what he promised, like you had at the beginning of the show, Jenna, where he said, I will get you out. We will remain until all Americans are out. But the reality is the Taliban does not control all of Afghanistan. They control large swaths of it. In between that, that's controlled by ISIS-K. That's controlled by Al-Qaeda. That's controlled by warlords, drug warlords specifically. So our citizens may have to navigate trying to get out through Pakistan, trying to go north to Uzbekistan or Tajikistan. The chances of them being able to pass through those areas safely are slim and none. And so consequently, Americans have been abandoned. The administration does not want to admit that, but when you look at what is happening on the ground, the intelligence services and the people who are there knew that this was a possibility. And now the reality is with 80 to 100 billion dollars worth of top-notch U.S. military equipment there, we just created the finest armed U.S.-designated terrorist organization in history. And the reason we went in 20 years ago has now been wasted by the Biden administration, because if you don't think these well-armed Taliban aren't going to create safe havens for these terrorist groups, aren't going to engage in terrorism themselves, they're sadly mistaken.
Commander Leopold, you had just mentioned earlier about the arc of instability. President Biden said earlier tonight that he wasn't going to hand over this war to a fifth American president, and that we shouldn't be fighting a war based on circumstances of 20 years ago, that the world has changed significantly in the last 20 years. There's been a lot of focus and shifting now towards China. I want to get your thoughts on that.
I think what the president unfortunately was handed was a failure, actually, by three previous presidents. President Bush, President Obama, President Trump, and now President Biden have failed to address the root cause of what allowed the Taliban to continue to exist. Pakistan gave the Taliban safe haven. They allowed them to recruit, to arm, to finance, to train, and conduct terrorist operations into Afghanistan that resulted in the deaths of American citizens. But we would not hold Pakistan accountable. And so until you go to the root cause of how this problem continued to fester for 20 years, then President Biden may be right in saying we should get out. But the real solution to the problem would have been to turn to Pakistan and say no more. And if you won't get in and govern your Northwest territories, we will govern them for you. We had a policy for years where we would do drone strikes in there, taking out top Taliban leaders, and we should have continued that policy. Right now, you want to make Afghanistan and the Taliban hurt? Wipe out the poppy fields. The billions of dollars that they get from the drug trade alone is going to handicap them and not allow them to project power that may endanger not only the United States and our global interests around the world, but our allies as well. And that should be
All
a
right.
consideration going forward.
Retired Navy Commander Kirk Leopold, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your insights tonight.
Thank you, John and Jenna. Pleasure to be on.